Hello, my name is Garvin, and I read things and natter about them on the internet for your entertainment. So, we're gonna turn around and look at Lemuria in pop culture and its treatment in different media, just to see how it's been used in those different stories. And we're gonna start with comic books. Our starting comic is Eternals by Jack Kirby, published by Marvel Comics. Now, before I start on the comic, let me talk just a little bit about Jack Kirby, who was born Jacob Kurtzberg in New York City, the United States, in the year of our Lord 1917. He was actually the son of immigrants, Austrian Jews, who moved to America, and he was determined to go as far as his artistic talent would take him, and I think he went pretty far. Now, during his childhood and his early youth, he was rejected by a number of art schools. But unlike certain Austrians, he kept working on his talent. He started illustrating cartoons for a newspaper of the Boys Brotherhood Republic, a youth club at the time that ran itself like a small city. In other words, the boys who were part of the club were running the club directly. I'll include some sources in the description about that because it's very interesting, but I'm not going to dive down that rabbit hole today. Moving on. From there, he started working for other newspapers, and then he moved on to comic books where he met Joe Simon, and they started working together. This is important because in 1941, these two would create Captain America, a landmark character for comic books in general, not just Marvel comic books, and one that even with everything going on today, that I am personally grateful exist. Kirby would be drafted in 1943, and he would serve as a scout for an infantry unit in Europe during World War II. I won't go into too many details here, I just want you to know that this man did a lot with his life, and honestly, I could do an entire video just on Jack Kirby. That said, I do want to note some of his accomplishments here, because throughout his long career, he worked for Marvel, DC, and others. On the Marvel side, he would be part of the creation of characters like the Fantastic Four, Ant-Man, Thor, and over on DC, he would create the New Gods, the Tomorrow People, Mr. Miracle, and through his work, he also brought to DC the villain of Darkseid, who, if you ask me, is one of the more powerful villains. And I don't mean like his power level, I mean his power in terms of theme and plot. That is a villain you can work a lot of stories around. He is incredibly iconic, and we have Jack Kirby to thank for him. But today we're going to look at a work that took place after a lot of those creations in the mid-1970s. So, in the mid-70s, Jack Kirby left DC and returned to Marvel, and in 1976, Marvel began publishing his Eternals series. It's a story that has a very interesting and somewhat compelling core concept here, and it goes like this. 1 million years ago, the Earth was visited by a race of aliens called the Celestials, who are also called the Space Gods, probably because they're 2,000 feet tall, clad in armor that makes their very appearance a mystery, wield technology that even advanced alien civilizations don't understand, and they have this weird habit of showing up onto planets and completely diverting the evolutionary course and jump-starting species into sapience. Which is what they did here, creating 3 very closely related species. The first, and today, the most numerous, is of course us, humanity, Homo sapiens sapient. The second are the unstable deviants. They're a species with an incredibly high level of mutation, so they have a lot of variation in their gene pool, for lack of a better term, and they have a lot of different body plans and phenotypes going on. The last species are the Eternals that the series is named for. And if you ask me, these Eternals are the favored children of the Celestials, and I'll talk about that more later, but back to the plot. So the story picks up with an Eternal named Akaris leading a scientist, an archaeologist, and his daughter to a hidden Inca city that turns out to be a spaceport that was built by the Eternals for the Celestials when they return. And it's a good thing Akara showed up to wake up the ground crew that was in suspended animation for over 1,000 years or so, because the Celestials are back, and that's actually not good news, because the Celestials have come to render judgment on the planet Earth. They will take 50 years to gather information and observe, and if their judgment is negative, they wipe us out completely, down to the last molecule. No pressure, anyone. And it is during this period of judgment that the story of the comic books take place. So let me talk some more about the Deviants and the Eternals here. Starting with the Deviants, as I mentioned, they're a very varied species. And this leads to a good number of them, even by Marvel Comics standards, developing what we would call superpowers. And they also breed pretty fast. Faster than humans, it seems, at least. And some of these guys, of course, were born with genius-level intellect, and this allowed them to advance much faster than humanity, having much more advanced technology than us. So, in the prehistory times of Marvel, they took over the world and founded their capital on the lost capital of Lemuria. You see how this all ties together now. And on a side note, I just want to say I do have respect how Kirby seems to have looked at Hackles and others' idea of Lemuria as the cradle of humanity and goes, "Nah, bro, this isn't the cradle of humanity, it's the prison cell." Because while this was a golden age for the Deviants, for us humans, this was the worst period in history. Because the Deviants decided that we rated somewhere between domestic cattle and slave labor. They used us as disposable labor, and their chief source of entertainment was torturing us. And while the Eternals did try to contest this, there just weren't a lot of them, and the Deviants had a vast population and an incredible industrial base. Until the Celestials reappeared, and the Deviants' reaction to seeing basically their creators show up in a fleet in orbit around their world was to open fire on the mysterious and unknowable space gods. This went as well as you would imagine. The Celestials destroyed their entire civilization, going as far as to sink Lemuria under the sea, where the Deviant survivors still live in underground, undersea bases hidden beneath the ruins of their lost empire. Meanwhile, humanity was encouraged to forget about this completely by everyone else who was involved, and kind of allowed to become the dominant species on the planet. Meanwhile, the Deviants have never been able to rebuild their numbers from that just complete devastation, but they've also never been able to let go of their ambition to regain their global empire and place everyone under their boot. In fact, it's the overriding focus of their culture, so nice guys. Their society is also brutal towards each other. Deviants who mutate too much, according to the opinion of the elite class, are periodically rounded up, enslaved to fight to the death, or if they're really unlucky, burned to death while being jeered at by a bloodthirsty mob. This is not a good place to live. This is not a culture that prizes compassion or kindness, to put it mildly. On the other hand, we have the Eternals, and they're a very inward-focused culture, divided up into small secret settlements, usually on the top of mountains, somewhere barren and uninhabited. Eternals usually spend their time meditating and training to develop their own powers and talents, and these are rather significant powers. All of them are immortal and stronger and faster than your average human. They can fly, and they seem to be able to learn how to rearrange the very molecules or possibly the very atoms of matter to create or change things. You can see why I called them the favored child of the Celestials, right? Now, not all Eternals are huddled up in their secret settlements meditating on the universe. Some of them go out and live among humans. Cersei is a character that does this, and she was later brought into the mainline comics where she even became an Avenger for a while. I do like that they just flat out state that she's also the Cersei of Greek myth and calls Odysseus' crew a bunch of boorish slobs who deserve to be turned into pigs. It's kind of an interesting way to approach that myth, and it's also kind of interesting to note that in Marvel comics, Cersei becomes a heroic character, while DC's Cersei is a villain who usually fights Wonder Woman and forces Batman to sing. That said, I don't want you to think that this story is simple as Deviant's bad, Eternal's good. Kirby does a good job showing that being a deviant doesn't make you evil by nature. We get characters like Karkas, a deviant of monstrous size and appearance, who turns out to be a very intelligent and rather good-natured fellow when he's not being tortured daily, sometimes hourly. Oh man, deviant society really sucks, what can I tell you? On the flip side, there's also Reject, who looks like a fairly handsome young man, and the deviants are so upset by this that they have sentenced him to fight to the death in the arena, because how dare he be born pretty and they're not? Did I mention deviant society really sucks? Even one of the main villains, the deviant General Crows, shows positive qualities. He is willing to keep his word and uphold a truce when the Eternals suggested, instead of following his master's plan of inciting humanity to war to try to get the Celestials to wipe out humanity so the deviants can take over Earth. I promise they're good deviants. But all this stuff shows us that deviants are not evil because of genetics or even physical ugliness. They're prone to evil because they grow up in a culture that encourages sadism, slavery, blood sports, and is lost in this unending dream of military conquest. And that eats away at them and makes them vicious, brutal, dangerous people. I also want to note that reinforcing this idea is the fact that there are villainous Eternals. Our main character is an Eternal named Icarus, and in one of the stories he has to confront a Eternal who is trying to find a way to kill Celestials using their own technology. And he's willing to torture and murder his fellows to do it. Now, leaving aside his willingness to jump to torture and murder, this is just a bad idea in of itself. Icarus and Cersei and their allies have been trying to convince everyone to come together for the common cause of passing the judgment. And I really can't see an alternative here, because this is the other plan is fighting a species that has been so technologically advanced that they could travel to other planets and uplift species into sapience millions of years ago. And that's leaving behind little things such as there are thousands of them. They average about 2,000 feet tall, wearing impenetrable armor. I know I've harped a lot on their height, but even if they didn't have technology that quite literally makes them seem godlike by our understanding of physics, the fact that they're 2,000 feet tall makes things rather difficult, because anything that big should be able to just finger flick away tanks. It's like, leading an army of ants to try and kill somebody with a can of Raid and a cigarette lighter. It's not going to end well. I also just want to note that the original story doesn't take place in the mainline Marvel Comics universe, or at least it didn't seem that way to me. Some reasons I got to that conclusion fairly early in the series. The deviants disguise themselves as demonic appearing aliens to invade New York. This is part of the plan to incite humanity into starting a war with the Celestials so they'll get wiped out. And I'm sorry, this is Marvel Comics. If an alien army invades New York, you need one hell of an explanation for why there wasn't an army of superheroes to oppose them. No superheroes show up in this series, with the exception of a robotic duplicate of the Hulk, but when that happens, everyone talks about Hulk as if he's a fictional character, not a real person, enforcing this idea that, this is not the mainline Marvel universe. Now, on the flip side, in an early issue, S.H.I.E.L.D. agents show up and talk about having to report to Nick Fury, so I'm not entirely sure either way. And I get the feeling this was never really worked out in the writing room either. That confusion aside, I did enjoy reading the series quite a bit. The plot is interesting, and there's a lot of room for different characters and ideas. There are some downsides. This series was canceled in 1978. They did revive it in the 80s, but I'm just focusing on the 1970s run here. So there was never a conclusion. Also, all the human characters felt like sidekicks. They're just not very relevant to the plot, which is mostly focused on what the Deviants and the Eternals doing. Human governments do react to this. For example, the US government sends out a space mission to get close-up videos and photos of the Celestial ship. They send out spy missions to try to figure out what different Celestials are doing. A Soviet general goes rogue and tries to launch an ICBM at a Celestial in Siberia. But most of the time, humans are just standing around or running for our lives, hoping that the Deviants don't do anything that provokes the Celestials, and the Eternals can sort everything out before anything goes too bad. So I would personally grade this series a low B. Also, something I want to note, that this is drawn entirely in Kirby's art style, and I'm okay with that, and I know some people who really love that art style, but I also know others who really hate it, like viscerally hate it. So keep that in mind. If you like Kirby's art style, or you can at least stand it, you'll be okay with this series, but if you hate that art style, this isn't for you. You can pick up an electronic copy on Kindle, and I recommend giving it a spin if nothing else, because there's some interesting ideas in this story. Now, revisiting the Lemuria aspect of this series, because that is the whole reason we're here. Lemuria doesn't really play a huge part in the plot, other than being the ancient undersea homeland of the Deviants, and the Deviants live beneath the ruins of Lemuria. So while those ruins do appear quite often in the story, they're not a huge part of it. And what I found interesting is Lemuria is treated as this place that is lost and forgotten by humanity, and there's a strong suggestion in the series that humanity forgetting about Lemuria was honestly for the best. Jack Kirby's not the first writer to run with this idea, and he's probably not going to be the last, and we're going to talk about that more with next week's comic. And I say that because this isn't the only time Marvel would invoke Lemuria. But on that note, I think this is the best place to stop for this week. I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like a voice on future subjects for the videos, consider joining my Everwise patrons for $1 a month. There's a link in the description below. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to give a special thanks to Big Steve, my biggest supporter. We would not be here without you, man. I really appreciate your support. Next week, we look at the sort of deceptively titled Atlantis Attacks by Marvel Comics. I hope you'll join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.